Hey guys, before I get started on this episode, the Golden State with Mates Patreon has a new lower price, $2.99 and $4.99 per month memberships where you can access up to 5 bonus podcast episodes every week, a daily Warriors newsletter, and get yourself in the draw to win monthly giveaways. I'll leave a link in the description. It would be great if you could go and check it out. Coming up on this episode, mixed results for the Warriors in their back-to-back against the New Orleans Pelicans and Memphis Grizzlies, but did they just unearth their latest hidden gem in the form of Malevy Leons? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Just some quick and unfiltered thoughts here in the wake of Golden State's back-to-back against the New Orleans Pelicans and Memphis Grizzlies on Tuesday and Wednesday night. Obviously, started in disappointing fashion with yesterday's loss to the Pelicans, 113-109, where the Warriors put themselves in a hole in the first quarter, found themselves down double digits, scored just 11 points through the first 9 minutes, scored just 39 points in the first half. And despite coming back and getting in front in the third quarter, they weren't able to cap things off. And probably that big play, if I look back at it, the huge Zion Williamson layup, which was called an offensive foul as he kind of warded off Guy Santos and then was correctly challenged and changed into an and-one layup. That was probably the big moment in the game, which allowed the Pelicans to take control when at that point they were only up one, kind of midway through the fourth quarter. And the Warriors kept fighting late through, largely thanks to Anthony Melton, who had a season-high 28 points. But they weren't able to click offensively early in the game, and that's what ultimately cost them toward the end of that, which was really disappointing because the Pelicans, albeit had won 3 of their 5 games going in, and of course Golden State, without Steph, without Jimmy Butler, without KP, their ability to beat anyone, obviously, doesn't matter who it is obviously compromised right now. And as a result, I suppose it was good that they were able to respond against the Memphis team that we know are tanking, are not looking to win whatsoever, just had a loss a couple of days earlier to the very lowly Sacramento Kings. But again, as I said, the Warriors and the shorthanded nature of their rotation right now, we can't take anything for granted. And so for them to come out and get not only a win over the Grizzlies in the past couple of hours, but actually do it fairly comfortably, lead by over 20 at halftime. And essentially, what did the Grizzlies cut it to, like 14, I think, at some point in the third quarter? I think that's as close as they got. And then the Warriors pushed it back out to like 30 in the fourth, and the Grizzlies got a little bit closer down the stretch there, but it was all window dressing by that point. So an impressive bounce-back victory for Golden State. And slightly disappointing, I think, overall. I would have liked to have gone 2-0 and to have a 3-game winning streak without Steph and KP, and obviously Jimmy would have been something really big for Golden State's aspirations to try and move up to the 6th seed if they can. I think at this point that's probably not going to happen. I think the more realistic ambition is to try and get to the Phoenix Suns at the 7th seed, who are obviously at the moment without Devin Booker, who should return soon, but Dylan Brooks is more of a long-term issue. He obviously broke his hand in the past few days and will be out for at least 4 to 6 weeks. So he's been Phoenix's second-best player, averaged over 20 points per game in his first year with the Suns. So the Warriors, through that Dylan Brooks injury, if they can get Steph back, if they can get KP back, if they can get somewhere closer to being fully healthy. Obviously, they're never going to be fully healthy with the Jimmy injury, but if they can get back to being somewhat healthy, then maybe they've got the ability to push up to the 7th seed, which not only gives you obviously home matchup in a potential first playing game against Phoenix or whoever finishes 8th, and therefore strengthens your chance at making the playoffs. But I think just as importantly, if they can win that first playing game, as we saw against what happened last season where the Warriors got to play the Rockets in round 1, they could play a team like the Spurs. And yes, the Spurs would go in favourites, but I have real concerns on San Antonio's lack of playoff experience. And as impressive as they've been, as great as Wemby is and Harper and Castle and Fox and whoever else, they've got a fantastic team, but they are young. And I think the Warriors, even without Jimmy, if Steph is somewhat healthy, if they get something from Porzingis, they would give themselves a puncher's chance of winning that matchup, as opposed to finishing as the 8th seed. If you do actually go through the play-in tournament and finish as the 8th seed and have to face the Oklahoma City Thunder, for example, in round 1. Now, there is a chance, I suppose, that the Spurs actually push up. Let me just look up the Western Conference standings right now. I think there is still a chance that the Spurs, who are only 2 games back from the Thunder, actually elevate over into the first seed. So there might be some toing and froing there in terms of who you'd actually prefer to play and where you'd actually if the Thunder were to drop to 2, would you actually prefer to fall to 8, or if you're the Warriors, remain 8th and potentially play the Spurs round 1? Either way, you can't really. You don't want to be flirting with that too much. You just want to make the playoffs, and the Warriors are still in position to hopefully do that. In terms of today's games, looking at some positives, the Warriors want to just unearth their latest hidden gem. Now, if there's one thing they have done well in recent years, and Mike Dunleavy Jr. in the front office deserves credit for, it's for identifying talent almost out of nowhere. All right, we know the Jonathan Kuminga stuff and the James Wiseman stuff and the inability to hit on their 2 top 10 picks in 2020 and 2021. But if you look at what they've done later in the draft recently, it's been very, very good. If you talk about likes of Quinton Post, Guy Santos has obviously been the biggest positive for the Warriors over the past month, 6 weeks or so. He was a 55th overall pick. Will Richard led the Warriors today in scoring with 21 points and 6 rebounds. Leaked out in transition a bunch of times as the Warriors generated plenty of steals from Memphis. So Will Richard, another big hit there late in the second round of the draft. So the Warriors have been really good at identifying talent kind of out of nowhere, and Malevy Leons might be the latest development prospect for Golden State here after he made what was really his first meaningful debut. It wasn't his debut. He played in 5 games beforehand, but those 21 minutes that he had played had essentially all been in garbage time. So this was his first real rotation, first quarter opportunity for the Warriors since signing a 2-way contract in early December. And he was really, really impressive. Again, against a similarly young, inexperienced, small Memphis team who were really porous defensively. Like, we understand that. But Leons was excellent, I thought. He looked comfortable on both sides of the floor, finished with 9 points, 8 rebounds, couple of assists, couple of steals, a block. Nailed his only 3 of 5. Obviously, disappointing he missed those couple of free throws late in the game there, which would have obviously given Golden State all 9 rotation players, scoring 10-plus points, which would have been notable. Obviously, Fitz was making huge mention of it toward the end of the game in the broadcast. He kept on mentioning it basically every offensive possession for the last 5 minutes, trying to get Leons to 10 points so the Warriors could have all 9 rotation players hit double figures. But it wasn't to be. He missed those 2 free throws. But aside from that, still a very impressive performance that generated some praise from Steve Kerr in the post game, also from Moses Moody. They put Leons up to speak as well. So the Warriors might have something there because he's an interesting, I tweeted out, he's interesting. He immediately pops up the screen to you because he's 6'9", but super skinny. He's got a 7'1" wingspan. And when you're a Warrior team that has so often lacked size and height, I suppose, in recent years, just having a 6'9" guy out there with a 7'1" wingspan almost automatically just pops off the screen to you kind of thing. But the ability to use that size, I thought, was impressive in this game. His ability to guard guys one-on-one defensively, again, using that wingspan, using that length, I thought was impressive. Obviously, on the glass as well, there were a couple of times where I think he had 4 offensive rebounds, but there was a few times there where the Grizzlies were forced to foul as well, just because of his size. Obviously, had that emphatic dunk in the fourth quarter there where he kind of pump faked on. He didn't really have to give much of a pump fake, but just blew by it from the perimeter and threw it down. So he's an interesting player, and the good news for him, and I think the good news for Golden State, is that he's still got 2 years beyond this one of eligibility on a 2-way contract, because I'm not screaming out right now and saying, Malevy Leons has to be part of the rotation even when Steph Curry and Kristaps Porzingis are back and all that. That's not going to be the case. Not only were the Warriors without Steph and KP in this game, they were also without DeAnthony Melton and Draymond Green, and Seth Curry, if you want to throw him in there. So they were down a bunch of rotation players, which is why Leon's got opportunity. I don't think he's necessarily going to suddenly become a genuine rotation member for the Warriors when they get healthier. But In time, could he be a player for them? Yes. And that's what I think a two-way contract should be about. Yes, you've got guys like Pat Spencer who can be on a two-way contract and come in and kind of play straight away. And he's actually, like, going into this season, Pat Spencer was the backup point guard to some degree. Like, if Steph's out, Pat Spencer jumps in and plays. And we all know Steph's going to miss time. I think two-way contracts are usually for guys like Leons who are more developmental prospects, and it could take time for them to become legitimate rotation members. But you see games like this where, again, you're shorthanded, he comes in, he shows some signs, he shows some flashes, which proves to you that this guy's worth persisting in. And that's what I think is important here is, again, we might not see too much of him, hopefully it's a good thing that we don't see too much more of him moving forward over the remainder of this season, because the Warriors actually kind of get healthy again. Again, it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing if he does get rotation minutes, again, just from a development standpoint, stuff like that. But hopefully it's more about next season, potentially the year after as well, to have a guy who could remain on a two-way contract with the Warriors, who could continue developing in Santa Cruz, bring him up occasionally, especially second night of the back-to-back like this. I think that's going to be really important for the Warriors, and hopefully they have something there, because he just has to look at a guy like Guy Santos as the perfect example of, hey, here's a guy that was biding his time for a good couple of years. Just, waiting out. Guy was, been on the main roster for a couple of years now and whatever else on a standard contract. But still, a guy who's largely been out of the rotation, played here and there, but it been in and out a lot. And now Guy has suddenly taken advantage of Jimmy Butler's injury and has become a bona fide rotation member for the Warriors. Even when they get healthy, Guy Santos is still going to be playing big minutes. Same can be said for Moses Moody. Now, different situation. Moses is obviously a lottery pick, but we spoke about Moses Moody's inconsistent role and the up and down nature of his career for years and years. And now we've gone into his fifth season here, and probably the back end of his fourth season a little bit as well, where it's like, okay, this guy's a 28 to 30 minute per game player and a bona fide starter on this team. So there's a couple of examples there for Leons to look at of teammates who, again, have had to bide their time and develop. In the case of Santos, come up from the G League kind of thing and play straight at a lower level before getting consistent NBA opportunity. So I thought it was exciting. It's exciting to watch. It was a strong display from the Warriors. It was a stark contrast to the night before, where their offense obviously struggled big time against the Pelicans. They shot, I think, 41% from the floor, 24.4% from three, committed 21 turnovers. It was tough, particularly early in the game. And then obviously this one against the Grizzlies, to be able to turn it around rather quickly, shoot in excess of 53% from the floor, 41% from three. I think they only committed 14 turnovers or something like that. I thought what they did offensively in this game was kind of the blueprint of what they have to do without Steph. Move the ball, just be really crisp, not make silly mistakes and turnovers and ill-advised shot selection and stuff like that. So it was nice for them to bounce back and produce this kind of performance on the back of what was a really disappointing loss against the Pelicans, I thought, because yes, New Orleans have some talent. They've got Zion Williamson, DeJounte Murray, being back was good to see. But they should have won. I still think they should have won that game. That's a team that has won, 15 games all season or whatever it is, 15, 16 games all season. Regardless of kind of the rotation that you've got at hand, like that's just the game you want to be penciling in as a W. So very glad that they were able to bounce back against the Grizzlies, because going 0-2 would have put a big dent in any hope of Golden State, I suppose, lifting up to the 7th seed. But again, if you look at the standings right now, they've been stuck. I think they've spent like 2 days out of, since like the start of December or late November, basically. They've been the 8th seed for all but 2 days since like late November. So they've just been this team for ages. And there was obviously that brief period during, just prior to the Jimmy injury, where they went 12-4, where they were starting to elevate themselves closer to that top 6. They weren't necessarily making inroads from pushing up the standings straight away, but they look like a team that could rise up into the top 6. And the Jimmy Butler injury, unfortunately, put a big dent, or not just a dent, but blew a hole through those chances. And this Steph injury, the KP illness that the Warriors are now dealing with, has has further hurt their chances here of doing anything meaningful this season, I suppose. But just getting these like developmental pieces in place that could play a role into the future, like Leons, like what Guy's been able to do, like what Moses has been able to do. There are still certainly positives to take from what the Warriors have done in the past 6 weeks since Jimmy Butler's injury. Obviously, that's the biggest disappointment of the season, but there are silver linings and positives to take from it. And Leons is just the most recent example of that in taking advantage of an opportunity that wouldn't have otherwise risen for him, if not for obviously all the rotation shortages and absences for Golden State. Moving forward here, the Warriors played the Lakers on Saturday at Chase Center, back home after that 2-game road trip. The big question to me from a lineup perspective remains on what they do at the center position, because again, we saw a stark contrast, and I don't want to keep going at the point over and over and over again, but until we see a change, I feel like it's a notable conversation to have. We saw the stark contrast again between having Al Horford at the starting five and Draymond Green at the starting five. The blatant disrespect that New Orleans showed Draymond as a scorer/shooter in that first quarter, I thought was pretty damning yesterday. Now, in credit to Draymond and the Warriors, they kind of bounced back from that. And I thought Draymond didn't have a terrible game. Like he's had worse games than what he had yesterday. I think the Warriors were a +8 in his minutes, so he's actually okay. But I just thought when the game was there to be won early on, and the Warriors needed to try and get off to a quick start, the Pelicans' blatant disrespect to Draymond was again a pretty strong indication of the liability, I suppose, that he now is to the Warriors, particularly from an offensive standpoint. And again, 11 points in the first 9 minutes was representative of that. And then to have him go out of the lineup, obviously resting / whatever this back injury is on the second night of a back-to-back. I reckon he'll be back on Saturday against the Lakers. And that'll give Steve Kerr a big decision to make, I think, because, you look at what Al Horford did in this game against the Grizzlies. And look, the numbers-wise, it says, he only had 10 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. So it wasn't like he was absolutely amazing like he was on Sunday against the Nuggets when he had 22 points on 6 of 7 threes and had 7 assists and whatever else. But even though the 10 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists doesn't seem like a whole lot, I thought his impact on the game was still incredibly notable, with both having obviously him as a stretch five out there to cause the defense to rotate and chase out to him and close out to him and stuff like that. But also like the ability to run the offense like in post-up situations through a guy, and this is going to be relevant for Kristaps Porzingis as well when he returns and hopefully plays some games in the last 20 games of the season. But having a guy in post-up situations who's actually going to look to score. And this is the thing, like the Warriors split cut actions have obviously been a patented drill for them for years and years. But so oftentimes you have like Draymond Green in that post-up situation who's not really a scoring threat, or previously like Kevon Looney or Trace Jackson-Davis, or guys that just weren't going to actually be a threat to score the ball. And it just became, I think, far less effective for the Warriors as the years have gone on here. And now you've got a guy now, Horford, who I don't think he's not the guy he was, previously, if you go all the way back to his days with the Atlanta Hawks and stuff like that, as a legitimate scorer. However, he does have like baby hooks and stuff like that. He's capable as a scorer in post-up situations. And that just brings an extra level of threat, which if you're a team like Memphis today and you're playing without a genuine center, well, they've just got no choice but to double team him repeatedly. And then, Horford does a great job swinging the ball, and, the ball swings around the perimeter and the Warriors inevitably get an open shot. And look, look, they shot 53% from the field and 41% from three-point range. Well, that's no surprise when Al Horford's, drawing double teams, and all of a sudden you're able to play offense from advantageous situations. Same with Porzingis. We saw in his debut game against the Celtics, got double teamed multiple times in the post. Again, the Warriors didn't do a great job of necessarily capitalizing on that. But having that scoring threat, I think, is so much different to, unfortunately, having Draymond at this point, who is an offensive liability, who teams are going to be more than willing. Like, he's a willing shooter, but he's not a good shooter. Teams are going to be willing to leave him wide open. He's also not he's not a skilled post up player as a scorer either. So it's not like he's going to score, be a threat as a scorer from that position either. So Steve Kerr, like, the numbers are there since Al Horford's return on Christmas Day against the Dallas Mavericks. The Warriors are like a plus 73 in his minutes since Christmas. In that same time frame, they're minus 47 in Draymond Green's minutes. One guy's 6'9" and been largely a center for the I don't know if I'd say the majority of his career, but obviously over recent years has been a center for the Boston Celtics and stuff like that. So you've got that in comparison to Draymond, who has been a power forward most of his career, now has transitioned into like being more of a small ball five predominantly. The Warriors, again, you look at a game like this against Memphis, it was just nice for them to have, and again, Memphis without a genuine center, so the Warriors didn't have to put a whole heap of size out there themselves, but just to have more size in the opposition, I thought was a nice change to have in this game against the Grizzlies. And we'll see what happens moving forward here in terms of the Al Horford Draymond Green dynamic, because I'm not particularly sure Steve wants to start both of them. And to me, again, the numbers are there. The eye test is undeniable when it comes to Al Horford should be starting over Draymond Green, in my opinion, or at least like he's a more important player than Draymond Green. It's as simple as that. And Al's, up to playing 27 to 28 minutes now. So they're more closer to starter level minutes. It's not like he's on a 20-minute restriction. He's up to 27, 28. I don't know. We need to make the decision at some point, I think, because I think it's becoming untenable to start Draymond Green as a small ball five. And when you've got Horford there, who's very productive, it's a pretty clear decision to me, but it's still going to be interesting to see if Steve Kerr is willing to go to that. Obviously, part of this is also going to come down to what's the go with Steph and KP. Steph is the time frame is up for him to be reevaluated, so he's going to be reevaluated prior to Saturday's game against the Lakers. Doesn't mean he's returning and playing on Saturday against the Lakers, but the Warriors now have a couple of days off here to potentially get back home and have a scrimmage or two, and whether Steph participates in that, we'll wait and see. Again, no guarantees that he plays on Saturday against the Lakers. And then Kristaps Porzingis, no guarantees there either. Never any guarantees when it comes to his health and availability. Very disappointed that he's missed the last 3 games, but again, hopefully he can show something over the last 20 games. And if he can return and build his load up to playing 22 to 24 minutes and then putting him in calculations for a starting role, well, what does that do with Draymond Green as well? Because Guy Santos is playing well enough to stay in a starting role. So too Moses Moody, DeAnthony Melton as well. The Warriors do have some options here, even though they've obviously lost Jimmy Butler, who you would have liked to have penciled in there, obviously in every game moving forward. So it's going to be a fascinating watch on Draymond Green's role with the Warriors, not only in terms of him no longer being a bona fide part of the closing lineup, but whether or not the Warriors should actually tinker with him potentially coming off the bench and also pushing him into that kind of role, which could be a nice tester, I guess, or a nice preview to what we could see next season if Draymond Green was to opt out of his contract, for example, and re-sign on a deal that is more in line with someone who's a 6th or a 7th man, making $10 to $12 million a year, something like that. Now, whether Draymond wants to, forego a $27.7 million player option or not to be on a far more team-friendly contract, obviously, from a financial perspective, I wouldn't blame him if he picks up the player option, but he's got to understand that if he does, he's probably most likely going to get traded. And obviously, if the pool of staying with the Warriors in the long term is there and he wants to remain a one franchise player, then I think the best thing for him is to opt out and go to the Warriors and say, all right, let's execute a much more team-friendly contract for you guys because I want to remain a one franchise player. So we'll see what happens in free agency, but what happens there is obviously going to be very heavily impacted by what happens in the last 20 or so games of the season. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at Pop252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter, Golden State with Mates on the Patreon, Instagram, and TikTok as well. Let me know what you made of this back-to-back. Malevy Leons, what do you think of him as a prospect? Let me know anything about the Draymond Green, Al Horford situation, what your thoughts are there. Warriors play the Lakers, as I said, on Saturday. I'll be back for another podcast episode after that. Thanks again.